Smoke signals from around the campfire.
So, around 30 years ago, I went to university to study economics because I wanted to learn the mother tongue of public policy and help change the world. And I was so frustrated and disappointed in what I was taught because the issues I cared most about, like ecological breakdown and social inequalities, these were at the margins of the syllabus. You had to hunt them down if you really cared about that. So I walked away from academia and I immersed myself in the real world economy. I worked in the villages of Zanzibar for 3 years. I worked as an economist at the United Nations for 4 years. I worked as an economist at Oxfam for over a decade. I now teach at Oxford University, not in the economics department, funnily, in the Environmental Change Institute, which is actually in contact with the reality of what's happening to the planet. I advise governments, I advise companies, I'm an economist, and that's exactly why I'm here. Because if you go to the roots of the word economics, ekos nomos, it means the art of household management. Who could hope to sign up for a more noble profession than that? That we should manage our collective household in the interests of all her inhabitants. Back in ancient Greece, when the term economics was coined, it was coined by a philosopher called Xenophon. He wrote the first book called The Economist, and it was about managing your estate, how to manage your slaves, and if you should let your wife keep the books. These were the concerns of the early economists. Towards the end of his life, Xenophon raised his attention to the city-state of Athens in which he dwelled, and he looked at the economics of the city-state. Should we allow foreigners to come in and work? How should we trade? These questions have endured. 2,000 years later, Adam Smith raised our sights a level again to the economics of the nation state. Why is it that one nation thrives while another stagnates? And we've been living for over 250 years with Adam Smith's fixation on the nation state, which is why we still think economies are measured in the GDP of one nation against another. But it's time for us as a generation to raise our sights again. I bet if Adam were alive today, he'd say, for crying out loud, get with the times. Yours is the era of the planetary household. And you must be economists of the planetary, not the national, not the city, not the single house, the planetary Earth system. So when we're economists of the Earth system, we would start economics on day one, not with supply and demand of the market. That is an outdated starting point that will not serve us well. We should start with our planetary home. Economists, if they want to manage our planetary home, need to understand her carbon cycle, her hydrological cycle, her nutrient cycles, her ecosystems that are so deeply interdependent and fragilely balanced in the Holocene that is our home. And economists need to understand the inhabitants of the earth, especially human beings and the way that we are, because we are not the self-interested, competitive individuals that economic theory calls us out as. We're the most social of all mammals. We collaborate, we cooperate. No single human could raise themselves. We are altruistic and collaborative as much as we are competitive and individual. So let's understand our planetary home. Let's understand the inhabitants of this home, and let's begin 21st century economics there. And I want to start with asking you what the shape of progress would look like in the 21st century. Because it's definitely not the shape of progress that we inherited from the 20th century. For this, I need a small piece of hosepipe. This is the shape of progress of the 20th century. It's the shape of progress that this city and all other cities run on. It's exponential growth, measured in national income, measured in corporate profits, the idea that a system is only succeeding if it's growing endlessly. And then when it gets there, it grows some more, and then some. This is out of date. It is not serving people, it's not serving the planet. We need a new shape of progress. And that is why I offer you The one donut that actually turns out to be good for us. I offer you this as a 21st century compass of progress. So, imagine humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the center of this donut. So the hole in the middle of the donut is a place where people are left falling short on the essentials of life. It's where people don't have the food and water, healthcare, housing, education, political voice that every person needs to meet their essentials of life. Let's leave no one in the hole of the donut. That was actually a very 20th century agenda of human rights. And we still need it today because millions of people worldwide still live in that hole without the food, housing, water, healthcare, education, political voice that every person has a claim to. But now we have to add a 21st century complication to this story because we now know too much about this delicately balanced living planet to ignore her any longer. Just as we must use Earth's resources to meet every person's need and leave no one in the hole, we also must make sure that as we collectively use and interact with Earth's living systems, we don't overshoot this outer ring, this ecological ceiling. Because when we do that, we put so much pressure on this extraordinary, delicately balanced planet that we kick her out of balance. We cause climate breakdown. We acidify the oceans. We create a hole in the ozone layer. We destroy whole ecosystems and kill entire species. And around this outer edge of the donut are the 9 planetary boundaries that Earth system scientists recognized only a decade ago. We are so young at understanding our planetary home. Just a decade ago, they identified these 9 critical life-supporting systems that keep Earth as the home sweet home for humanity that she's been for the last 11,000 years. I'm talking about a stable climate, fertile soils, bountiful, abundant species, plentiful fresh water, a protective ozone layer overhead. This is what has allowed us to thrive. So put those two together. Let's leave no one in the hole falling short on the essentials of life. But let's not overshoot the outer boundary and break down the living systems of our planetary home. And so the 21st century shape of progress is no longer never-ending growth. It's balance between the two boundaries of social need and ecological ceiling. And if you think about the symbols of well-being in many ancient cultures, it's extraordinary how they already reflect this. Think of the Mari Takarangi, the Taoist yin-yang, the Buddhist endless knot, the Celtic double spiral. They all reflect this sense of dynamic balance, and it's actually the Western conception of progress that's the outlier, this ever-rising line of growth and then some more. And we need to reinvent our Western conception of progress so that it far more richly echoes an ancient wisdom. So let's get into the donut that meets the needs of all people within the means of the planet. Because right now we are far outside. There are millions falling short in the center, and we're way overshooting our pressure on climate change, on biodiversity loss, species death, on land conversion, on excessive fertilizer use. We need to come into this from both sides at the same time, and it's never been done before. Countries in the past have met people's needs by exploiting Earth's resources. Now we need to figure out how to meet people's needs by restoring Earth's resources. So every country in the world, to my mind, is what we would call a developing country now, because there is no country that can say, oh, we're developed, we're there. There's not one country. Every nation needs a huge dose of humility and an extraordinary level of ambition right now. But then the question is, so how do we do it? I believe we need to change the fundamental dynamics of economics that were taught in 20th century universities. Put up your hand if you ever studied any economics at school or university. Okay, brilliant. Put up your hand if you can't believe you're standing at a talk that's got economics in the title. Okay, this is a re-education for us all. So, I believe we need to replace 20th century economics with 21st century principles, and there are 2 that matter more than any other. Hosepipe. 20th century economy was degenerative and linear by design. This is what it looks like, a pipe. We take Earth's materials, we stick them in the pipe of production, we use them for a while, often only once, and then we throw them away. We take, make, use, and lose. And this is what pushes us over planetary boundaries. This is what cuts against the cycles of life. We take again and again and again from Earth's sources, chopping down the trees, drawing fish from the rivers, and we throw our waste again and again and again into Earth's sinks. Carbon dioxide into the sky, plastics into lakes and rivers, electronic waste into the neighborhoods of the world's poorest people. We need to turn this linear degenerative system into a circular or cyclical regenerative one. An economy in which there is no such thing as waste. It's just a resource in the wrong place. That's true for the plastic in the ocean as it is true for the carbon dioxide, the life-giving building block of carbon. It's a resource in the wrong place. Let's draw it back down and store it. We need to use Earth's resources far more carefully, far more slowly, far more collectively. And there's extraordinary innovations. If anyone here is an innovator, a creator, this is an amazing task to take on. So we need to go from being linear and degenerative to cyclical and regenerative. But that's just half the story. The other problem is about distribution. We have inherited economies that through their technologies are centralizing of the value created by design. The resources through our energy systems, through the major corporations, how they're owned, how they're financed, through the banking systems, resources are ending up in the hands of a 1%. Even value that is created by many seems somehow to get reaped and extracted and captured by a very few. And we need to go from this deeply divisive economic system into one that is deeply distributive. Woo! And the beautiful thing is, we have, for the first time in human history, technologies at hand that are asking us to do this. Think of energy. In the 20th century, energy came from an oil rig, a coal mine, a gas pipeline owned by a handful of companies or the state or shareholders who captured the returns of that extraction. 21st century, it's a solar panel, a wind turbine dotted across the landscape, dotted across villages in this country and in villages in India, across Africa. For the first time, communities and schools and households can own the capacity to create energy cleanly. What about media production? In the 20th century, we had massive Fordist factories, down boy, down. Massive Fordist factories where all the workers came into work and earned their little wage and went home. But the money stayed with those who owned the factory and who reaped the returns on that ownership. 21st century, we've got distributed production systems, 3D printers that can sit on your desktop, far smaller technologies through digital technology that we can run our own businesses, sitting at a desk in the kitchen in your own house. And this means there's huge potential for small-scale businesses to arise and to thrive, to be part of a renewers, makers, fab lab economy. 20th century again, every communication went through a centralized switchboard and out the other side. 21st century, you've all got a node of the digital communication network in your pocket, as so have people in villages in Tanzania, across India, across the poorest parts of the world. We can communicate on an unprecedented scale, and that's the best bit, because 20th century knowledge, well, actually all the way back to the 1600s, knowledge was stored and held in patents and copyrights, which were actually designed to share ideas. So ironic that they've turned out to be manipulated in the pharmaceutical industry, in electronics industries, to capture ideas, to prevent and block innovation. And this century, we've got the innovation of Creative Commons licensing, open source design, which we can share through that network of digital communication, and we can create those ideas in the fab labs of decentralized production with the energy that's on the roof of your own factory. So we have an unprecedented opportunity to create far, far more distributive systems and to ensure that income is not just redistributed, but the sources of wealth creation are pre-distributed. It's not just going to happen on its own, however. We have to actively make that work. Otherwise we'll get like the big five capturing digital communications. We need to make sure that these technologies are democratically owned and protected in whole ecosystems. And I believe these two principles of regenerative and distributive design, they come together. I want to give you an example how. Think of clothing companies that say they're going to create a circular economy with the clothes that they make. So let's say the company that made the jacket I'm wearing, oh, we're going to do a circular economy. So the linear economy, don't throw your jacket away, bring it back to us and we will remake it. Could you hold that, madam? Thank you. And then another clothing company gets a bit jealous and says, oh, well, if they're recycling their clothes, we'll recycle them as well and bring it back to us. There we are. Now, I want everybody here to imagine that the clothing company that made the jacket on your back says to you, send it back to us. Make a little loop above your head as if you were part of the circular economy. Go on, I mean it. Oh, you look gorgeous. Hold it. It's beautiful, guys. You look like ballerinas in your first lesson. It's lovely. But nature would laugh at us. Come down. Nature would laugh at us. Hold that up for me. Nature does not turn a peacock into a peacock and a daffodil into a daffodil. Nature, where's she gone? Here she is. Nature makes an ecosystem. Nature returns everything to the ecosystem and builds again and again. So we are never going to get a circular regenerative economy with one company at a time setting up its own recycling system. We need an ecosystem of textiles reuse and plastics reuse and metals reuse and ceramics reuse and electronics reuse if we're going to have a chance to do this. And that's why the private sector alone will never get there. We need the state to step in and provide leadership. We need the commons to come in and be part of this nested system. So this really is a whole economy exercise that will only work if we all do it together. So the shape of progress is no longer endless growth. It's balance in the donut, a metaphor we profoundly understand in our own bodies. Our health lies in balance. Have enough food, enough exercise, water, oxygen, calories, but not too much of any of them. Health lies in balance at the human body, and the same is true for the planetary body. We need to find a balance we have never found before that meets the needs of all people within the means of the planet. And here in the UK, this is particularly incumbent upon us. Ours was the first nation into the Industrial Revolution. We have a moral imperative to lead again and to be the first nation out. This city and many cities in the United Kingdom were built not only on the extraction of Earth's resources, but we know on the extraction of energy and unpaid labor from people from all around the world. It's the historical inheritance of an empire. And if we want to engage in reparative acts, one of the first we can do is to get out of the fossil fuel economy and show that we are committed to moving fast, far faster than 2050, far faster. That's why we're here, because even though the government believes that they are showing leadership by committing to net zero carbon by 2050, that's way past where we all know that we need to be. So let's be the first in and the first out of the Industrial Revolution. I leave you with Doughnut Economics, and let's open this up to a conversation. If anybody wants to come with a question or a comment or a critique, very welcome. Thank you.
Sorry. I just wanted to say it was hands down the best talk I've heard for a long time. Absolutely amazing. So positive, constructive and real. Just to speak to what you're saying about the banks. Capitalism only works because we, the consumers, with our purchasing decisions, support it. We can change it. We can change the system with each of our decisions that we make. each decision that we make is powerful. So with banks, for instance, banks should not lend money to fossil fuel companies, right? That is just right off. So everyone, write to your bank, say, unless you state publicly that you're divesting in all fossil fuel companies by, say, December the 1st, I'm closing my account with you. That's the sort of language that capitalism understands, and each decision that we make can influence them, so we should use that. Thank you.
And never underestimate your power as a banking customer, or indeed as the newest employee in a bank. I met the CEO of a major brewing company recently, who was at a university business school very proudly talking about their sustainability plans. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Why have you put sustainability at the center of your corporate strategy? And he said, well, it's very important to be sustainable. I said, no, but really, why have you? He said, oh, because about 8 months ago, I was giving a talk to all of our employees, a kind of corporate internal talk, and a hand went up at the back of the audience. It was a young man who had just joined the company. And the young man said, and what are we doing on sustainability? And the CEO said, I had no idea. So I turned to the head of corporate affairs. Always a bad idea when the CEO turns to the head of corporate affairs to find about sustainability. But he was so ashamed of that he realized if he wanted to retain that young talent, that latest employee, that newest customer, he was going to transform the company. So never underestimate your power as the youngest, as the newest, as the most curious, because you are the edge determining the future, and these companies are so sensitive to whether or not young people are proud to tell their friends who they work for in the pub, and whether their customers actually like being their customer. So never underestimate your power. This lady had a question.